Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, August the 11th, 2021. I want to begin today by talking about electing a new people. It's a famous poem by Bertolt Brecht called Die Lösung, and he wrote it in response to the uprising in East Germany in 1953. And it goes like this in an English translation. After the uprising of the 17th of June, the secretary of the Writers' Union had leaflets distributed on the Stalinallee stating that the people had forfeited the confidence of the government and could only win it back by increased work quotas. Would it not, in that case, be simpler for the government to dissolve the people and elect another? Peter Brimlow is very fond of this because it describes what's happening in the Western countries. In every Western country, the people are being dissolved and a new people is being elected from abroad because we need them for some reason, which is really never made clear and there's no evidence of it. But we need them. And, we becoming minorities in our countries, it's inevitable, they tell us. It's ineluctable. It's science, people. Of course, it is nothing of that thing, but this is what we are told. Rather extraordinary article appeared in the Vancouver Province. It was a reprint from the Washington Post by Amanda Coletta. It appeared on August the 7th. And it is titled, Canada Wants Immigrants, but the Pandemic is in the Way. So it's looking to keep people already here. Quote, immigration is increasingly becoming the primary, if not the only, source of labor force growth. Well, more than 10 years ago, when Jason Kenney was immigration minister, he released some statistics which revealed that all net labor growth in Canada would come from immigrants. In other words, no jobs for Canadians because that's the way we do things now. Let's see. Let's start with a heartwarming tale. Arjun Van Dam came to Canada in 2017 on a work permit with his wife and children to help his Dutch employer, a purveyor of agricultural equipment, set up shop. He liked the country. In 4 years, the 33-year-old's family grew from 2 children to 5, including twins born this year. But Canada's immigration system was not weighed in his favor. His age, lack of post-secondary education, and average English language skills meant that qualifying for permanent residency was a challenge, said his Toronto-based lawyer, Barbara Jo Caruso. Canada wants more immigrants, 401,000 this year, to be exact, and is not letting pandemic border controls get in the way. That means some new programs, including ones granting residency status to people already in the country and in jobs that might not have previously qualified. Well, you see, that's a wonderful example that Amanda Coletta found, because there are practically no Dutch people coming to Canada. There are practically no white Europeans coming to Canada, and there have been practically none of them for many years now. The type of person that this story is actually about are people from Asia and Africa. The story continues. Canada has long been a destination for economic immigration, but the retooling of its policies reflects wider shifts globally as countries reel with the fallout of a global pandemic that has deeply disrupted movement and migration. Derp, derp, derp. From Chinese students who dreamed of studying in the United States to migrant workers in the Persian Gulf, pandemic border closures, flight bans, and the scaling back of visa services have brought unparalleled upheaval to the flow of workers, students, and regular and irregular migrants across borders. Immigration fits very prominently into the plans that we have to accelerate our economic recovery, Marco Mendicino, Canada's immigration minister, told the Washington Post as well as continuing to strengthen Canada's long-term prosperity. Well, numerous studies, including pioneer work from Herbert Grubel, formerly of Simon Fraser University, has proved that immigrants are a net detriment economically to the Canadian economy. Leaving aside the wholesale disruption of community that this involves, but governments continue to lie and say that, oh, we need ever more people from abroad. The fact that most of these people don't speak English or French is apparently not relevant. Of course, if we didn't bring in so many people, Canadian wages would rise, and we can't have that. Also, it might be possible, once again, for average middle-class people to own homes, but no. Homes for Canadians, middle-class Canadians, everyone knows that homes are for overseas Chinese. The Post continues, the overarching aim of these new initiatives and Canada's increased immigration targets have been generally well received. Yes, I wonder why that might be, because no anti-immigration speech is allowed in the Canadian media. Some analysts, however, have raised concerns, including about whether they could have been better designed, exclude too many vulnerable people. Oh no! Or are feasible given processing times and backlogs. How about the fact that the Canadian economy has been absolutely smashed by the self-inflicted panic over COVID-19? And we're currently paying a great many people, well, not to work, to the extent now that restaurants cannot find servers. Yeah, how about that? Before the pandemic, Canada's population was growing at a rate not seen in decades, outpacing the other group of 7 industrialized nations. International migration was the main reason, said Statistics Canada, accounting for 86% of population growth in 2019. That year, Canada accepted 341,175 permanent residents, up from 271,840 in 2015. And that's not even counting, let's say 500,000-600,000 more people who are supposed to be temporary in Canada, but increasingly simply do not leave. And it's almost impossible to force them out, even if they have signed agreements stating, for instance, that they will work as nannies for 2 or 3 years and then go back to the Philippines. Then came the virus. In 2020, the number of permanent residents plunged by almost half to 184,595, far short of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's target of 341,000, and a potential headache for a country that has long relied on immigration to offset the impacts of low birth rates and an aging population on its labor force and public finances. In other words, wages must be kept low. As far as skilled workers go, it is not beyond the realm of possibility for the governments, instead of importing foreigners, to train Canadians to do these jobs. Population growth in the United States in the decade to 2020 slowed to the lowest rate since the Great Depression, according to data released in April by the U.S. Census Bureau, tied in part to decreased fertility rates and slowing immigration. And what was the result of that under Donald Trump? Wages for lower middle class and working class people actually rose. And once again, we can't have that because it means slightly smaller profits for multinational corporations. The United States, with nearly 10 times the population of Canada, granted permanent resident status to 700,362 people in 2020, down 31% from 1,031,765 in 2019, according to U.S. government data. Since 2010, immigration has declined, driven by the economic crisis early in the decade and government restrictions under the Trump administration. Immigration is increasingly becoming the primary, if not the only, source of labor force growth in Canada since as the baby boomers retire, said Andrew Agopsowitz, a senior economist at the Royal Bank of Canada. To make up the shortfall in 2020, the Canadian government in October announced even loftier immigration targets. It hopes to welcome 401,000 permanent residents in 2021, up from a previous goal of 351,000. That target would increase by 10,000 in 2022 and again in 2023. Marion Campbell Jarvis, an Assistant Deputy Minister of Immigration, told a parliamentary committee in May that the government expected border restrictions would soon ease, allowing the government to admit permanent residents from abroad. But the pandemic's grip tightened, so Canada had to get creative, Jarvis said. Canada had already invited more than 27,000 people to apply for permanent residency under one stream of its Express Entry program for skilled economic immigrants with recent work experience in Canada, more than 5 times the previous record. The program uses a points system to score applicants based on criteria such as age, education, and work experience. In recent years, the minimum score needed to qualify for an invitation was well more than 400 points. For that particular round in February, 75 points cleared the bar. It's definitely unprecedented, said Andrew Carvajal, a Toronto-based immigration lawyer. The number of invitations that we've seen this year, how low the scores have gone, are very interesting and very different. I should explain something to foreign listeners. One hears a great deal of talk about Canada's point system. It gives the impression that the only people who are allowed to come to Canada are people with skills. Not true. The last time I checked, only about 17% of immigrants to Canada come under the points system. The rest are refugees, family reunification immigrants, and dependents. So no, Canada's immigration system is not based on economic needs. Then in May, the government opened a new program, a temporary pathway to permanent residency for 90,000 people already in Canada with temporary status. They include 40,000 recent international student graduates, 20,000 healthcare workers, and 30,000 people in other essential jobs, such as cashiers, janitors, and butchers. And of course, it would be a bad thing for Canadians to have this job. I think it's great, said the Dutch agricultural products executive Van Dam, who has not yet heard whether his application has been successful. Everything is easier if you have a permanent resident card. These efforts have not been without critics. Analysts at the C.D. Howe Institute, a nonprofit research group, said that lowering scores under the point system amid the economic recovery would mean admitting immigrants who will experience more significant integration challenges. Advocates took aim at the exclusion of asylum seekers and undocumented people, i.e. illegal immigrants. That's my interjection, not the Post. In so-called essential jobs from the temporary pathway program that opened in May. Other analysts supported the initiatives, but found flaws in their design and rollout. I think it's both important and necessary and the right thing to do to turn to people who are already in the country who wish to stay and facilitate their transition to permanent residency, said Anna Trianda-Fuel-Edu, the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Migration and Integration at Ryerson University in Toronto. She said that the pandemic has forced Canadians to rethink what work is essential. Not just highly skilled engineers, for instance, but also caregivers on the front lines of the pandemic. And of course, we wouldn't want more Canadians acting as those caregivers and nurses. No, because that would be bad just because. In June, other analysts at Ryerson University wrote that while the justification for the program is sound, the implementation process does not promote equitable access for all eligible occupations. This may still be happening, but in the past, Canada has imported strippers from Eastern Europe. Yes, Canada has imported strippers. And, massage parlor workers from Asia. And of course, most of these people are actually prostitutes, many of whom live in sex slavery. But, GDP über alles. Some workers, especially in lower skilled occupations, may effectively be excluded by the complex application process, which involves a proliferation of lengthy forms to complete, tests to take, documents to obtain, translate, and upload, technology to utilize, and fees to pay. Well, maybe we should pay them to come to Canada. Caruso and a law clerk sat with Van Dam as he completed his application, walking him through it. There's no way he could have done it on his own, she said. It took 3 months for the Immigration Department to acknowledge receipt of his application. The international students category was fully subscribed within days. The stream for essential workers took longer to fill up, but just 3,295 healthcare workers have applied for 20,000 spots, according to government data. The program closes in November. Do we really want to be treated in hospital by healthcare workers from the Congo or Guinea-Bissau, or from graduates of one of the myriad diploma mills in India? Apparently so. From January to the end of July, Canada admitted 184,215 permanent residents. Mendocino, who champions these initiatives as cutting-edge immigration policy, says he's confident the country will meet its target. In a December speech before the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem, yes, the governor of the Bank of Canada is called Tiff, Tiff, short for Tiffany, I suppose. This is a man we're talking about. Cited Canada's well-educated and diverse workforce as its biggest asset, but he also pointed to a potential wrinkle: renewed competition with the United States for global talent under the Biden administration once the pandemic eases. Yes, global talent, I guess, is what you would describe the invasion of the United States by ignorant peasants from Mexico and Central America, many of whom do not even speak Spanish. In the past 4 years, the policies and attitudes of the U.S. administration helped make Canada look more attractive to students and workers, giving us an advantage, he said. With the incoming U.S. administration, Canadian schools and companies may have to fight harder to attract and retain talent, but being a welcoming country remains an important advantage, and immigration creates economic capacity, which is the most important thing, obviously. So there has been no debate about immigration in my country in my lifetime. There simply hasn't been. In 1967, our immigration laws were changed to match the Hart-Celler laws in the United States, with the result that since that time, the overwhelming majority of immigrants to my country have been from the third world. Many, a great many, from such lawless hellholes as Haiti and Jamaica. Increasingly now, from Afghanistan, say, because, and Somalia, because these countries have so much to offer. If you want an idea of the voice of Establishment Canada, here's Frank Graves, founder of ECOS Research, adjunct research professor, Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Carleton University. This is August the 9th. One late night thought as I head off to the land of Nod: do Canadians recognize how blessed we are? We are in better shape than any other major player on the planet. And yes, we are a major player. No, we're not. And immigration, geopolitics, climate change, and resources will make us more so. How climate change is going to make Canada more of a major player? Interesting point. Geopolitics, Canada has no say in the world. Resources, well, it is now the policy of the Canadian government that the oil and gas must stay in the ground because it's evil. And immigration, how exactly does immigration make Canada better? Canada was, as recently as 50 years ago, a homogenous country where people get along. Now we're very close to the war of all against all. And what we have seen, a truly horrifying development in recent years, to paraphrase what Éric Zemmour said in France, he talked of a new Ribbentrop-Molotov pact that is between Islam and liberalism. Well, in Canada, we have a new Molotov-Ribbentrop pact of radical Indians, Native Indians, and fractious immigrants who hate Canada. They have teamed up to destroy Canada and to give themselves more spoils, to kill Canada and then carve up the corpse. And of course, the elite of this country the universities, business, the media, etc., are all for this. Steve Saylor noticed the piece that I just read, and he commented today on it. Canada wants warm bodies. Yes, the horror of the possibility that Vancouver might someday be affordable to Canadians. Didn't I read something in the news about a global pandemic and dangerous new variants emerging in places like India? Oh, sorry, my mistake. The Delta variant isn't from India, it's from Delta. Yes, such barriers are inequitable to the inalienable right of every illiterate in the world to move to Canada. And guess what? Erin O'Toole, the opposition leader, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, he's all in favor of 400,000. Also, what he wants to do is to lower Canadian standards in the professions so that people from abroad, say from diploma mills in India, can be accredited in Canada. And you know what he says? This has to do with human rights. Well, there is no human right for every person on earth to live in Canada. Erin O'Toole, despite his name, he is a man. And I'll just remind listeners that his first name is spelled E-R-I-N, which literally means Ireland. So I guess his parents were so Irish that they just had to let the world know that, the surname O'Toole wasn't sufficient. Here is a look at Erin O'Toole when he became leader of the Conservative Party from John Ibbitson, who was an immigration zealot, to put it mildly, in the Globe and Mail in September of last year. Prepare for a very different Conservative leader with Erin O'Toole. Well, yes, the health critic for the Conservative Party wants to legalize poppers. Why? Because they make anal sex less painful. Yes, seriously, that is the argument. And the fact that poppers are now illegal in Canada is discrimination against the alphabet people community. He is bullish on immigration, especially through reuniting families. He would end the ban on blood donations from gay men. Yeah, well, what happened the last time that was allowed? That turned out very, very badly indeed. So badly that the Red Cross was stripped of its role in collecting blood in Canada. So let's find out more about this new, exciting Conservative Party of Erin O'Toole. He is the rare example of a Conservative MP who has repeatedly won re-election in the 905, the swath of suburban ridings surrounding Toronto, named after its area code. Many of those ridings have large numbers of immigrants, and immigration was a topic Mr. O'Toole discussed at length. I have fought back against voices out there that want to curtail immigration because immigration is critical to our success. While Conservatives typically support recruiting new Canadians from the economic stream to fill labor shortages and drive entrepreneurship, O'Toole focused on the family reunification stream. Quote, many Conservatives resist bringing in relatives who can be a burden on social services, but at a time when schools and daycares are disrupted, limiting parents' ability to work, relatives can be a resource that family reunification can bolster. We should accelerate it if it allows the family to keep their business operating. So let's bring in grandma as a babysitter for the kids at Canadian taxpayer expense. And of course, grandma will have full access to Canada's healthcare system. Also, grandma will be eligible for pension benefits when grandma turns 65. If she's over 65, she'll get them already, both federal and provincial. Oh, and I should also mention with regard to immigration, we have affirmative action in Canada, and it's written into our Constitution that no one can be discriminated against except white men. That it talks of equality, but no, the special status, the quotas for immigrants who showed up the week before yesterday, that's perfectly constitutional. Yeah, how about that? Charlie Campbell who was the grand old man of immigration reform in Canada, he once told me a story. He asked me this. He said, suppose I lived in Vancouver at the time, suppose you were a student at the University of Toronto and you met a woman there, another student from St. John's, Newfoundland, and you got married. Would it be reasonable for you to invite all of your relatives from Vancouver and St. John's to join you in Toronto? And I said, no, that would be stupid. And he said, well, that's exactly what our family reunification policy is. We are importing whole villages from Somalia and Afghanistan and Jamaica and from the Punjab and from Haiti. That's what family reunification is. And of course, it was the so-called conservative prime minister who brought that to Canada in 1986, making it a priority, the top priority of the immigration system. So let's have a look at the question of, is immigration a good thing? This is from Emil O.W. Kierkegaard on his blog, A Clear Language, Clear Mind. Brian Kaplan's Open Borders book, Considerations. Back in 2019, Brian Kaplan and Zach Weinersmith published a serious comic book, Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration. It does what it says, argues mostly without left-wing shame tactics for the billion-dollar bills on the street. Well, I heavily disagree with the conclusion. Open borders would destroy Western civilization as we know it, and it is already doing to some degree. We tried this stuff before, even in recent times. I think the book deserves a comprehensive reply, but it seems no one has bothered to do this. I think a comprehensive reply can only really come from an explicit hereditarian perspective. The benefits of immigration to a country's citizens depends on the long-term impact of them, thus their children and grandchildren. How well these can be expected to do is a matter of debate, but we now have several decades of data in Europe from the largely Muslim immigration experiment beginning in the 1960s or so. Oh, yes, I should mention with regard to Canada's immigration policy that a great number, because Quebec's official language is French, a very great number of immigrants to Canada come not only from Haiti, but from North Africa. Yes, just, the best and the brightest. We should focus, says the comic book, on individuals, not averages. If, for example, the world of today looks like this: average native income, 50,000, average foreign income, 5,000. Then the world of open borders would look like this: average native income, 60,000, average foreign income, 20,000, average combined income, 40,000. If you see these numbers and say the world of open borders is economically inferior, you are committing the arithmetic fallacy. Yes, because bringing in people from foreign countries whose societies are alien to our own, who often, by the way, hate our guts, cannot speak English, who are overwhelmingly lower IQ, somehow this is going to improve our economy. Well, as George Borjas has shown in the United States, it has not improved the American economy. And as I said, as Herb Gruvel has proved in Canada, it has not improved our economy. But perhaps that will change for some reason that we don't know. Kierkegaard writes, the goal here is to attack the so-called arithmetic fallacy. I mean, okay. But if we reject their moral universalism, they are still assuming the average native income goes up from the importation of below average foreigners. This is just plainly false. To be very broad and brief, the functioning of a country depends mainly on the average quality of the citizens. When one admits below average people, the average citizen quality decreases, and thus the country functioning in the long term. Quality here refers to some composite of intelligence, psychopathology, work ethic, honesty, and other human capital traits. You can make your own judgment call about their relative importance. One way to show this kind of thing is to look for evidence of non-compositional effects. Suppose we import immigrants with IQ at 90 and natives are at 100. If we import enough so that they comprise 10% of the population, the new country IQ is then 99 instead of 100, and the country will suffer slightly in various ways. However, it is possible the IQ of the natives is affected by the immigrants too, causing a further decline. This is a non-compositional effect. It is hard to say how large such effects might be, but probably not their existence. I took a quick look to pick two examples from Denmark, and the Danish experience has not been good. Immigrant students in Denmark on average perform worse in lower secondary school than native Danish students. Part of the effect may not stem from the immigrant students themselves, but from the student composition at the school. From a policy perspective, the latter aspect is quite interesting since it is more feasible to change student composition in schools than the socioeconomic status of the individual students. To estimate the average effect of immigrant concentration for all students, well, this is rather complicated. I won't read that. But further down, so in an attempt to hire some more non-Europeans, the overall quality of the police force, to give one example, is lowered. So now everybody has to deal with more police violence, more crime due to incompetence, mistaken arrests, corruption, and so on. This has been a major problem in England, particularly in the Metropolitan Police of London. These kind of policy changes are abrupt and don't result from any specific non-European percentage. One can find many such cases in other areas of life, whether doctors, teachers, lawyers, or anything really. These kind of non-compositional effects will not be found in the typical empirical studies like above. And so crime is another area where the effects are obvious. Importing above average criminal propensity people will increase your own rate of victimization. This effect is small due to the high rate of intergroup criminality, but not zero. And one of the bounties that immigration from Asia has brought to Greater Vancouver are home invasions and drive-by shootings, which were unknown before the 1980s. Kierkegaard concludes, now, if we were really mean, we could go on to point out that even above average immigration can be net negative. This depends on the various non-compositional effects described above. Such persons will improve their economy, but they might hurt your national cohesion, reduce trust, etc. If such people have loyalty to another country or group, they will likely spy on you, which could be very costly in some cases. Let's look at the United States. This is from Ronnie Reyes for the Daily Mail. For the first time in U.S. history, the number of white people in the nation is expected to show a decline when racial breakdowns of the 2020 census are reported this week. The data set to be released August 12th will reveal just how much the ethnic and racial makeup of the nation has shifted over the past decade. 20 years ago, if you told people this was going to be the case, they wouldn't have believed you, said William Fry, demographer at the Brookings Institution. The country is changing dramatically. For 5 years, updates from the U.S. Census Bureau have estimated that the white population was shrinking and that all population growth has been from minorities, the Post reports. White people accounted for over 60% of the population in 2019, but Fry said that the opioid epidemic and lower than anticipated birth rates among millennials after the Great Recession has accelerated the white population's decline. Here is something which has also likely accelerated the white population's decline. The media, the schools, et al., telling white people that they are scum, that they are white supremacists, that they are racist, that they are evil, that they are akin to Nazis, that they are responsible for all evil in the world. And this is a sin which is ineradicatable. Yeah, how about that? That might have something to do with it. The black population has stayed steady at around 12.5%. The Asian population is expected to be around 6%, about double what it was in the 1990s. For the first time ever, the portion of white people living in the U.S. could dip below 60%, while the majority of the under 18 population is likely to be made up of people of color. Fry added that the white population will continue to dip below 50% in 2045, and the Hispanic and Asian population will continue to rise. There will no longer be a racial majority in the country. This is begging the question, if current trends continue, this will happen. Same as in Canada. However, that could change at a stroke. And let's have a look at the chat. Hello to Dan, Papicasso88, Polygons. Immigration to libs simply means ethnic food. To a very large extent, that is true. And it is very difficult to find any essay touting the virtues of diversity and more immigration without a mention of delicious, spicy food. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your work. Hello to Head McNeck. Jim Bowden. Hi, KMG, you're the man. Intellectually enlightening the great unwashed around the world. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Palpcasso 88, if KMG is right about Canada collapsing in 10 years, then immigration won't be a problem. That is not necessarily so, because there is no evidence that I can see that, let's say that Canada became 10 independent countries. We'll leave aside the Arctic. Everything argues that the immigration policies would continue as they are, but there is a greater likelihood that that could change, because that would mean that instead of a Canada dominated by Ontario and Quebec, the 10 provinces would be able to make individual choices. Headbang Deck says, I keep thinking that if the balloon goes up in America, most paper citizens will flood to both Mexico and Canada. I have pre-guilt over this for Canada, not so much for Mexico. Don Willis says, Uhuru. Hello to William Hicks and Emma Nimpton. How do these people even afford to live in Toronto? Well, a lot of them are on the dole. Practically all of the so-called migrants and refugees are on the dole. And their houses are paid for them. All those Syrian engineers and doctors, says Kontiki Roulette. TBE, imported strippers likely have lower BMIs than domestics, says Head McNeck. Okay. Polygons says racists see scabs, drug dealers, and racists and rapists. Us enlightened folks see doctors, scientists, and activists working to build back better. Well, thank you for that. Ironically, climate change might even open up the Northwest Passage to regular shipping. And who else do we have? Head McNeck says Mark Twain very eloquently put the noble red man hallucination to rest. Yes, speaking of the war of all against all, that was the situation among Indians and between Indians and Inuit in Canada and the United States before the white man arrived. And is Canada the world's largest insane asylum? I was looking at some, every weekend I look at the editorials in the Toronto Star, and it struck me, imagine being at an editorial board meeting at the Toronto Star. It must be like attending group therapy at an insane asylum. What's all this talk about paupers on KMG as of late, says Don Willis? Well, as I mentioned, the health critic of the Federal Conservative Party, whose name is Michelle Rempel Garner, sent a letter to the federal health minister asking for an initiative to legalize paupers in Canada, because their current status is an affront to the alphabet people community. Jim Smith says Joe Sobrand once called Canada the world's most knee-jerk politically correct country in the world, and that was at least 20 years ago. KMG, will you be voting for the People's Party? Last time I voted in a Canadian federal election was in 1997. But yeah, okay, sure. I'll make a pledge. I'll vote for the People's Party. Immigration to the left just means less white people, which is good in their minds, says Rustin Shackelford. Hello to Buddy. Oh, I have to talk about Catherine Zeta-Jones. Well, she is Welsh, so I suppose we have that affinity. I'm half Welsh by birth. Metal Mike says, according to Maclean's, the typical vax-hesitant person is a 42-year-old Ontario woman who votes Liberal. If I had any political advice to give about Canada, it would be to, for as many people to be persuaded, traditional Conservative Party voters, not to vote for the Conservative Party. because the Conservative Party of Canada is the guarantor of the destruction of Canada and all parts of it. In the absence of the Conservative Party, there could be a real opposition to the Liberals. Now, whoa. Almost shut this down here. There was a piece in The Guardian in January 2017 by Charles Foran called "The Canada Experiment. Is this the world's first post-national country?" Wow. Sounds pretty exciting, right? Canada's been overpraised lately for, in effect, going about our business as usual. In 2016, such luminaries as U.S. President Barack Obama and Bono, no less, declared the world needs more Canada. Why exactly? Canada doesn't exist. Well, it barely exists. Let's see. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, articulated this view when he told the New York Times Magazine that Canada could be the, quote, first post-national state, unquote. He added, quote, "There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada," unquote. The remark, made in October 2015, failed to cause a ripple, but when I mentioned it to Michael Bach, Germany's Minister for European Affairs, who was touring Canada to learn more about integration, he was astounded. No European politician could say such a thing, he said. The thought was too radical. This was an astonishing thing that Justin Trudeau said, but our media very conveniently decided to ignore it because, paying attention to something like that might lead to, I don't know, ugly questions being asked. And, well, okay, so what are we going to talk about next? I think we're going to talk about, extinction. Sounds bad, right? Well, here's an exciting piece from Roger Crisp, who's Uhiro Fellow in Philosophy at St. Anne's College, Oxford, and Professor of Moral Philosophy at the University of Oxford. And reading this essay further convinced me that as a very start, all philosophy departments in universities and colleges in the West need to be closed immediately. Would extinction be so bad? Professor Crisp adds. Given the amount of suffering on Earth, the value of the continued existence of the planet is an open question. You know that old song that if everyone doesn't have justice, no one can have justice, or if everyone isn't happy, no one can be happy? These are obviously absurdities, but Professor Dr. Crisp doesn't think so. In recent decades, it's often been said that we are living at the hinge of history, an unprecedented period during which a catastrophic event, such as rapid climate change, nuclear war, or the release of a synthesized pathogen, may bring an end to human and perhaps all sentient life on the planet. Most people think that such extinction would be bad. In fact, one of the worst things that could happen. It's plausible that the process leading to various forms of extinction and extinction itself would be bad for many of us, given that our lives are overall good for us, and that all else being equal, the longer they are, the better. But it's also plausible that extinction would be good for some individuals, those in the final stages of an agonizing terminal illness, for example, whose pain can no longer be controlled by drugs. Oh, are there any such people? That's a serious question, by the way, because we have found out, certainly in Canada and in England, that the healthcare profession, reacting to COVID-19, decided to hand out so many drugs to old people that they died in a day or two. Let's see. This means one key factor in judging the overall value of non-extinction will involve weighing these disparate interests against each other. Consider the huge amount of suffering that continuing existence will bring with it, not only for humans and perhaps for post-humans, but also for sentient non-humans who vastly outnumber us and almost certainly would continue to do so. So it would appear that Professor Crisp is one of those deep greens. As far as humans alone are concerned, Hilary Graves and Will MacAskill at the University of Oxford's Global Priorities Institute estimate that there could be 1 quadrillion people to come, an estimate they describe as conservative, not going to happen. When you see that the most important graph in history, Africa's population going like this, it's not going to happen. The whole world cannot work solely to provide food for Africans who don't do it for themselves because we give them free food. There will be a Malthusian die-off long before this graph is realized. Let's see, how can we make comparisons? C.I. Lewis, a leading Harvard philosopher in the mid-20th century, offered an intriguing thought experiment. To judge the value of some outcome, you have to imagine yourself going through the relevant experiences. Usually when we think about extinction, because we are not in great pain, we focus on the good things we'll miss. But if God were to offer you the choice of living through all the painful and pleasurable experiences that will ever occur without extinction, would you jump at the opportunity? I have to say I wouldn't. Oh, well, the world is full of people who understand, at least adults or perhaps children over the age of 7, traditionally considered the age of reason, that life is cruel and full of pain. And yet the vast, vast, vast majority of these people do not kill themselves. Perhaps Professor Chris could think about that. John Stuart Mill, okay, I can't take seriously anyone who admires John Stuart Mill. So Professor Crisp concludes, the question of whether extinction would be good or bad overall is obviously very important, especially in the face of potential catastrophic events at the hinge of history. But this question is also very difficult to answer. Ultimately, I'm not claiming that extinction would be good, only that since it might be, we should devote a lot more attention to thinking about the value of extinction than we have today. I'm generally not a conspiracy-minded person, but I have to think about something that is happening in the world right now, and how this relates to the honored Professor Crisp thinking, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing if all humans died. I mean, it sounds crazy, right? But this is a real person at Oxford University who is writing in the New Statesman, which was, at least until fairly recently, a highly respected publication. You know, I suppose from now on, and you can do this too, whenever you are accused of being hyperbolic about the nature of our enemies, just remember, point out what Professor Crisp had to say. And okay, time for some panic porn. This is from Andre Picard at the Globe and Mail. The Globe and Mail, which used to be described as the newspaper of the gay stockbroker, I suppose could now be considered the newspaper of the gay totalitarian. We have ways of making you comply. Let's see, bad fall forward. Those 3 words tweeted by David Naylor, co-chair of the Federal COVID-19 Immunity Task Force, very well summarize what we might try to look, what we try to look beyond the once expected summer of 2021. The much awaited 4th wave of COVID-19 has begun in much of Canada, fueled by the Delta version. This might be the toughest one ever. The fall and winter of 2021 will likely not be anywhere near as devastating as the winter of 2020, at least sheer numbers. We can thank for this the widespread adoption of vaccination by Canadians. But we're about to experience a new kind of bad, with a lot more children and young adults getting sick and hospitalized than in previous waves. Won't somebody please think about the children? Yes, prepare yourselves for many pictures of children in hospital beds. And regardless of the provenance of these pictures, or whatever it is that these unfortunate children are suffering, this is going to be Delta variant. Wait for it. It's probably happening already. To date, young people have not been affected as much by COVID-19. Yeah, how about that? Really? But the Delta version is different. People of all ages are becoming increasingly ill, especially if they have not been vaccinated. A significant minority of infected children and youth will develop permanent symptoms known as long COVID, aka the latest fake disease. The fourth wave is also emerging in a markedly different socio-political environment, with the small minority of vaccine denialists, vaccine opponents, and anti-lockdown activists becoming increasingly obnoxious. Their adoption of misinformation and conspiracy theories is more adamant. Vaccines are also angry. They do not appreciate undermining their civilization and are still demanding vaccine mandates, certificates, and passports, and punitive measures against those who refuse. Can vaccines get angry? I'm sure we're all sick to death of this pathetic fallacy of COVID-19. Viruses are not sentient. They have no agency. They're not wily. They neither have hopes nor dreams, but we keep hearing this. Many governments, especially conservative ones, are abandoning public health measures, betting that the public, or at least their base, is fed up with pandemic restrictions. The problem is not that governments have relaxed regulations, which was largely justified by fewer cases and higher vaccination rates. It's that many never established the metrics or set the conditions for potentially reinstating them when things go south. Oh, come on, please. We want the lockdown back. Remember those days? Those were great days, weren't they? When we were all terrified to leave our houses and apartments, when we thought that we passed someone on the street that somehow he was going to poison us and we were going to die in agony. Let's go back to those days. So when Andre Picard, when he brace for more COVID-19 nastiness, I have to ask the question, is that a threat or a promise? I think there's a profoundly religious aspect to what's happening under COVID-19. I read an essay about this yesterday from the American Sun, but also this question of extinction. Now, Christians and Jews believe, or at least they used to believe, in the words of the book of Genesis. Increase and multiply and fill the waters of the earth, and let there be abundance of flying things on earth. God said, too, let the land yield all different kinds of living things, cattle and creeping things, and wild beasts of every sort. And so it was done. God made every sort of wild beast and all the different kinds of cattle and of creeping things, and God saw it and found it good. And God said, let us make man wearing our own image and likeness. Let us put him in command of the fishes in the sea, and all that flies through the air, and the cattle, and the whole earth, and all the creeping things that move on earth. And God pronounced his blessing on them. Increase and multiply and fill the earth and make it yours. And God saw all that he had made and found it very good. So evening came and morning, and a sixth day passed. That's from the translation by Ronald Knox. But I suppose if we don't believe in any of that stuff anymore, then COVID-19 or any possible cause of death, anything should be done to prevent anyone from dying ever, presumably. And on the other hand, if we don't believe all that stuff, who cares if human life goes extinct? Let's see. Ashimane Bravo says, have you read the piece in The Atlantic by writer Anne Applebaum saying Mike Langdale, a.k.a. My Pillow Guy, is going to seriously destroy democracy in the USA? Yes, I have. I have seen it. I've been talking a lot about Anne Applebaum in recent days. My wife wrote that sex is better on vacation. That was a very hard postcard to receive, says Don Willis. Is there more than one Delta virus? Kind of like more than one Lassie? Well, apparently we're hearing of a super Delta variant now. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So we have to be locked down forever. Forever. And despite double jabs, triple jabs, quadruple jabs, we have to have masks forever, and social distancing, and washing our hands with disinfectant, even though it was admitted by the so-called experts last year that what they had said about the COVID spreading through people touching surfaces was not true. But it's good for companies that, like Lysol, say, because they're still running those commercials terrorizing people that if they don't routinely disinfect every square inch of their home, COVID's gonna get them. And, oh, yes, I mentioned before that opinion mongering in my country is dominated by PR spivs. This is an outrageous situation because there are innumerable conflicts of interest in whatever these people say based on whatever clients they're representing at the time. But apparently it's not possible to have people who are not PR spivs write op-ed pieces. Peter Donolo, who is, he's in the Gilded Circle in Canada. Let me bring up his wiki entry. Let's find out a little bit more. Born October 59 as a Canadian communications and political strategist. From 1993 to 99, he was Director of Communications in the office of Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. He previously served as communication advisor to Toronto Mayor Art Eggleton and was Director of Communications in the office of the Leader of the Opposition under Chrétien from 1991 to 93. From 1999 to 2001, he served as Canada's Consul General in Milan. That sounds like a sweet job. He's formerly been Senior VP of Public Affairs at Air Canada. He is a Republican who wants to end the monarchy. He was Chief of Staff to former Liberal Party of Canada leader Michael Ignatieff. And right now he's Vice Chair of Hill and Knowlton Strategies, which is one of the leading PR firms in Canada. Vaccine passports could win Trudeau a majority, says this PR spiv and longtime Liberal Party hack. That there's something going on in Canada, and perhaps my Canadian listeners have recognized it, that consent is being manufactured before our eyes for mandatory vaccine passports. And the people who vote for Erin O'Toole's Conservative Party are bad people because they tend to be against vaccine passports. And I suppose one of the questions of COVID-19 is, it's a serious question, like how many rights will be left to those of us who stand outside the consensus? O'Toole, this is from the CBC, O'Toole says all Canadians should get a shot. But a Conservative MP, remarkably, his name is David Urdiga, says Canadians deserve the right to liberty whether they choose to be vaccinated or not, which is apparently a controversial opinion. And, okay, latest news from the province of Quebec. Quebec to ban the unvaccinated from non-essential places such as bars, gyms, restaurants, and public events. Yes, and there's a picture of the health minister, Christian Dubé. He's holding up a smartphone that has some sort of illustration of a vaccine and a jab. And yeah, did you ever think that this smartphone was going to become the means by which the government would institute tyranny? Well, that's what's happened. And now, this is this can't be true, but apparently it is. This is Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A new report by researchers at Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh has found that the most highly educated Americans are also the most vaccine hesitant. The researchers canvassed no fewer than 5 million Americans who responded to surveys on whether they were probably or definitely not planning on getting a COVID vaccine. The results will shock many. More surprising is the breakdown in vaccine hesitancy by level of education, reports Unheard. It finds that the association between hesitancy and education level follows a U-shaped curve, with the highest hesitancy among the least and most educated. People with a master's degree had the least hesitancy, and the highest hesitancy was among those holding a PhD. Yes, it's a high-low alliance because we know that is what, as of last week, only 29% of Black Americans had been vaccinated. And Christopher Roach has a very good piece in American Greatness, which is at amgreatness.com. It won't stop until we make it stop. The case for new COVID restrictions depends on assumptions about the effectiveness of those restrictions and the magnitude of the risk. These assumptions do not match the facts. I reminded that today that Stevie Nicks canceled her 2021 tour because somebody got COVID in the company, and someone else made a rather rude joke that this is a woman who's had most of the inside of her nose destroyed by cocaine use, and she is terrified of a disease that has a 99% non-fatality rate. In fact, Stevie Nicks admitted in an interview some years ago that there is so much of a hole, under her nose, that it was suggested that she have surgery, to close it up. And she decided against that because she thought that it might affect her singing voice. Roach writes, the spike in cases is undeniable. For this, it seems several important facts have converged. The early hope for herd immunity has turned out to be a chimera. The authorities assumed herd immunity would happen through the spread of disease or immunity through the help of vaccines or both. But both the Delta and now the Lambda variants have undone old assumptions. Neither vaccines nor prior infections appear to offer much protection from these, although vaccines may prevent severe disease. We also know that lockdowns, masks, social distancing, and other high-cost measures to stop the disease did little to accomplish that end, but they did ruin our lives. In the good news department, deaths are mostly decoupled from this recent case spike. So this is becoming an endemic disease like the common cold or the flu. This is a typical progression. The case for new restrictions depends on assumptions, and the assumptions which do not match the facts. The COVID restrictions have proven profoundly versatile. They let the authorities rearrange the economy, pick winners and losers, diminish long-established rights, and I won't mention the end of the sentence. They keep everyone on edge and habituate some of the public to follow stringent demands, such as taking an experimental vaccine. These emergency measures offer the ruling class the means to short-circuit the normal give and take of political life and exercise dominance. This approach also has a spiritual component. It lets the ruling faction reconceive that their lives and this epoch are meaningful. This cannot be dismissed too lightly. Avoidance of COVID has become a near religious experience for some, with sacraments, sacrifices, priests, and a sharp distinction between the elect and the unelect. He concludes, tens of millions of passive resistors are the weak links in the system. The system can't realistically force anything in the face of this scale of passive resistance, and the proposed blandishments, like restrictions on international travel or eating at chain restaurants, are bearable costs for the people of flyover country. More important, the perpetrators have names, addresses, and comfortable lives insulated from the kinds of pressure an aroused public can deliver. To succeed, pro-freedom COVID politics has to go beyond the efforts of a single state's governor. Serious pressure and interference must be brought to bear on those who are responsible for this. As Maxine Waters once said, get in their faces. Everyone knows that abusers don't stop until you make them stop. And let's trust the numbers, right? This is from the Daily Mail, Mansur Shaheen. CDC admits it did overcount Florida's COVID cases. Agency revises down states' weekend numbers from 28,000 to 19,000, but offers no explanation after falsely claiming record infections. How about that? But of course, nothing to see here. Nothing at all. And we're heading into something new here. The numbers are turning against the so-called experts. And so what are we going to see? Well, we're going to see the stats start to be juked. That's simple. That is what is going to happen. Someone called Irfan Dawa tweeted, glad to see Ontario reporting cases, hospitalizations, and ICU admissions by vaxxed and unvaxxed. But as more people get vaxxed, eventually most cases will occur in the vaxxed group. Oh, wait a minute, I thought that this vaccine was supposed to be efficacious, 99% so or something. So it's essential that we include denominators to accurately convey the message that vaccines works. Let's call in the magic denominators. They're COVID heroes. This is from Caitlin Owens at Axios. A new preprint study that raises concerns about the mRNA vaccine's effectiveness against Delta, especially Pfizer's, has already grabbed the attention of top Biden administration officials. The study found that the Pfizer vaccine was only 42% effective against infection in July when the Delta variant was dominant. If that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is, a senior Biden official told Axios. And this seems to decrease with time, radically decrease with time. From Natasha Anderson at the Mail, leading journalist has called on Americans to get a grip and learn to live with COVID-19 rather than attempting to win an illusory victory over the virus. Speaking to Anderson Cooper on CNN Monday, Andrew Sullivan said it was time to lift lockdown measures, encourage people to take vaccines, and stop letting federal and state governments continue to impose lockdown rules on Americans' lives. Explaining his philosophy on the virus, Sullivan said, "Government isn't there to hold your hand every day. The government has a responsibility to give you the means to protect you and your family from this. Once they've done that, as a free country, you get to live." Well, thank you for that, Andrew Sullivan. Oh, Sean Penn says Americans should be forced to have a COVID vaccine and likens people who don't have the shot to reckless drivers. You will remember, perhaps, that this is a man who took shots with a pistol at a helicopter. Yeah. So he's a very reliable person, is Sean Penn. And yes, from France. After video emerged of Parisians having to show their vaccine passport papers to police in order to sit outside a cafe, President Macron asserted that the system protected people's freedom. Yes, really, as we highlighted yesterday, and this is Paul Joseph Watson from Summit News. Footage showed uniformed French police patrolling cafes and restaurants demanding proof of vaccination. Those unable or unwilling to show their papers face massive fines, while business owners could even go to prison if they refuse to enforce the system. However, the new program may end up putting a lot of people out of business, given the multitude of images that showed normally busy campaigns and restaurants all but empty. Let's see, despite the fact that the French haven't experienced such an intense papers, please society since the Nazi occupation, President Macron insisted that vaccine passports were about protecting people's freedom. Quote, "It's about citizenship. Freedom only exists if freedom of everyone is protected. It's worth nothing if by exercising our freedom we contaminate our brother, neighbor, friend, parents, or someone we have come across at an event. Then freedom becomes irresponsibility." However, Julien Audoul of the right-leaning Rassemblement National slammed the French government, asserting the Constitutional Council has approved a two-tier society where there are two categories of citizens who don't have the same rights depending on their vaccine status. I have a feeling things might blow up in France very quickly. Daniel Horowitz writes in Blaze Media, when King Ahab of the Bible murdered his neighbor to take possession of his vineyard, Elijah admonished him, "Have you killed and also taken possession?" Well, it appears that those who have promoted lockdowns rather than early outpatient treatment as a solution for COVID-19 are once again benefiting from a phenomenon that they likely caused, now using it to falsely instill more panic about children being in danger from COVID. Isn't it too convenient? Right when schools are slated to start again, the proponents of lockdowns and masks seem to have finally gotten traction on a narrative of children filling up the hospitals with COVID, a phenomenon not seen in any other country. As Alistair Munro, a pediatric infectious disease doctor in the UK, observed in exasperation, the US is the only country that seems to be panicking over pediatric Delta infections. There's much more in this article. but I'll likely be banned if I mention it. He speculates on respiratory diseases. And if we see pictures of children in hospitals, assuming that they're even real, which respiratory disease has put them there? Again, you can find this at theblaze.com. And let's go to lockdown skeptics, or as they're called now, Daily Skeptic. CDC study claiming unvaccinated have more than double the risk of reinfection is full of holes. The study looks retrospectively at data from the U.S. state of Kentucky. The researchers identify all those in the state who were reinfected during May and June 2021, defined in terms of positive tests a certain number of days apart, and compare their vaccination rates to a control group. They find 246 reinfections in that period and calculate that those who were not vaccinated were 2.34 times more likely to be reinfected than those who were. The study has a number of limitations, however, some of which the authors acknowledge. Firstly, the study period of May and June 2021 is notable for being a period of very low prevalence in the state, meaning it is not a good time to study acquired immunity, which is best studied during surge when it is most put to the test. The authors themselves acknowledge that because the study covers just one period in one state, quote, the findings cannot be used to infer causation. That's not going to stop the media, is it? Lockdowns to control COVID no longer justified, Sage advisor says. This is Professor Andrew Hayward of University College London. And Public Health Scotland admits that the majority of people hospitalized and testing positive for COVID are vaccinated. Let me repeat that. Public Health Scotland admits that the majority of people hospitalized and testing positive for COVID are vaccinated. Now, there's much that I could say on the reason for this, and I would use a word, a five-letter word that begins with L and ends with Y, but I daren't do that. The legacy of heresies. Being generous, we could blame an incompetent government blindsided by a pandemic that hit just as it was popping the cork on finally getting Brexit done. But the actions it took went beyond naivete and entered the realms of the Kafkaesque nonsensical. The last 18 months have been those of U-turns and false predictions, followed by denials, hirings and firings of experts paid to find or fabricate the evidence to fit the theory, promises to follow the science, to go by data, not dates, and then do the opposite. The mainstream media has refused to ask tough questions. Social platforms have censored anything that doesn't fit the fear narrative. Scientists and medics and employees across the spectrum have lost their jobs and reputations for daring to speak out or refuse injection. The nurses on the front line who worked around the clock last year without a vaccine will now be fired. If they choose not to have one, this is their reward. The elites have flourished while the proles festered. More than 1 million people waiting at least 6 months for vital NHS services in England alone. Is this a dystopian satire? No, it's daily life down under. Yeah. Well, it was worth waiting for. Finally, a tiny glimpse of the modeling that has underpinned government decision-making on Australia's COVID response. And very convincing it is, too. And unbelievably, literally unbelievably precise. Why do I have the door open to let the sound in? Because it is 81 degrees currently. And, of course, you can see how I am dressed here. Yes, we talked about the most educated being the most vaccine hesitant. Yeah, people should spread that as much as possible because it is it's very useful indeed. Let's take a look at Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. Well, specifically just to check that he is still there. He fully expects to be permanently evicted any day now. While the censors still allow me this account, now would be a good time to pre-order Pandemia. The subhead is How Coronavirus Hysteria Took Over Our Government, Rights, and Lives, and it is being published in November by, is it Regnery? Yeah, by Regnery, which is pretty major publisher in right-wing circles, although Berenson insists that he is not a right-winger. And what else do we have from Alex? President Biden calls on OPEC to boost oil output as gas prices soar. Let's see, destroy domestic production so you have to beg OPEC for help. I'm sure this headline could be more embarrassing for Uncle Joe, but I don't know how. Well, you know, Alberta has all this oil, which you would like to sell to the United States. And there's a pipeline that was planned. And Obama said no. And God knows Trump tried to get it going. But now that Biden's in charge, no, it has been permanently kiboshed. So let's import oil from halfway around the world with all the risk of oil spills instead of a pipeline from good old Alberta. Cops shot execution-style killings on the street, 22 murders this week. It's like Chicago isn't safe. And like half the guys in the city are high on a drug that causes paranoia at best, psychosis at work. Remember when they said that cannabis legalization would cut crime? LOL, cats. Am I the only one amazed that this has gone on long enough that it can come back to people a year later for specific reports? It really is the Vietnam War. Genevieve Campbell had tweeted, the U.S. panic about COVID in kids, something unique unfolding here unlike anywhere else in the world, is a mass hysteria. I'm sorry, but the Democratic Party is the party of delusional mass hysteria right now. Full stop. That's what it is. It's QAnon level alternative reality. Berenson comments, fact check, true. Oh, yes. This is COVID related too. You might wonder how it's COVID related. Well, Scarlett Johansson, or ScarJo, as some people insist on calling her, sued Disney, arguing that they violated her contract for the Cape Shit movie Black Widow, that they decided to allow people to watch it for free on Disney Plus, which cratered the box office returns, of which she was to get a fixed percentage. Disney has now decided, according to GiantFreakinRobot.com, Faith McKay, that they're canceling. Disney, the Devil Mouse, is canceling all the projects that she had lined up with Disney. In response to Scarlett Johansson's lawsuit, Disney issued a statement. It looked down on the actress a little like she was being a whiny child. They said they'd already paid her enough. They implied that she is insensitive when they said, quote, the lawsuit is especially sad and distressing in its callous disregard for the horrific and prolonged global effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, unquote. We're going to use a virus to justify breaking your contract and cheating you out of millions of dollars. Never change, Hollywood. Never change. I can recommend an article from thelampmagazine.com by Giorgio Agamben called The Medical Religion. And it begins, it has been evident for quite a while that while science has become our time's religion, the thing which people that they believe in, the thing which people believe that they believe in, three systems of beliefs have coexisted, and in some ways will coexist today in the modern West: Christianity, capitalism, and science. In the history of modernity, these three religions often and unavoidably intersected, each time clashing with one another and then reconciling until they gradually reached a sort of peaceful, articulated cohabitation, if not a true collaboration. What is new is that without us noticing, a subterranean and implacable conflict between science and the other two religions has ignited. Science's triumphs appear today before our very eyes, and they determine in an unprecedented way every aspect of our existence. This conflict does not pertain, as it did in the past, to general theories and principles, but, so to speak, to cultic praxis. No less than any other religion, science organizes and arranges its own structure through different forms and ranks. To its elaboration of a subtle and rigorous dogmatics corresponds, in praxis, a vast and intricate cultic sphere that coincides with what we call technology. It is not surprising that the protagonist of this new religious war is the very branch of science whose dogmatics is less rigorous and whose pragmatic aspect is stronger, that is, medicine, whose object is the living human body. Let us try to define the essential features of this victorious faith, one which we'll increasingly have to deal with. The first feature is the fact that medicine, like capitalism, has no need for a special dogmatics because it is limited to borrowing its fundamental ideas from biology. Unlike biology, however, medicine articulates these ideas in a Gnostic or Manichaean sense. That is to say, through an exacerbated dualistic opposition. There is a malign god or principle, namely the disease, whose specific agents are, say, bacteria and viruses, and a beneficent god or principle, which is not health, but recovery, whose cultic agents are doctors and therapy. As in every Gnostic faith, these two principles are clearly separated, but can, in praxis, contaminate one another. The beneficent principle and the doctor who represents it can err and unknowingly collaborate with their enemy without thereby invalidating either the reality of the dualism or the cultic necessity through which the beneficent principle fights its battle. It is indeed significant that the theologians who have to entrench this strategy represent a science, virology, that does not possess its own place, but stands at the border between biology and medicine. If until now the cultic practice was, like every other liturgy, episodic and limited in term, the unexpected phenomenon which we are at present witnessing is that it has become permanent and ubiquitous. The cultic practice no longer concerns taking medications, being visited by a doctor, or undergoing surgery. Rather, the entire life of human beings must become, at every instant, the site of an uninterrupted cultic celebration. The enemy, the virus, is omnipresent and must be fought constantly and ceaselessly. The Christian religion knew such totalitarian tendencies as well, but they pertained only to some individuals, monks in particular, who chose to entrust their whole existence to the principle of praying without ceasing. Medicine as religion embraces this Pauline precept and at the same time reverses it. Whereas monks gathered in monasteries in order to pray together, the cult must now be practiced no less assiduously, but with its devotees also remaining separate and at a distance from one another. The cultic practice is no longer free or voluntary, nor is it exposed to penalties of a spiritual type. It has become mandatory and legally unenforceable. This collusion between religion and profane power is certainly not a novel phenomenon. What is new, however, is the fact that this collusion pertains not to the profession of dogmas, as was the case with heresies, but only to the celebration of the cult. Profane power must be vigilant so that the liturgy of the medical religion, which by now coincides with all of life, is duly observed. The medical religion has unobservably adopted from Christianity the eschatological appeal dropped by the latter. Capitalism, by secularizing the theological paradigm of salvation, had already eliminated the idea of the end times, replacing it with a permanent state of crisis without redemption or end. And he concludes, like capitalism and unlike Christianity, the medical religion offers no prospect of salvation or redemption. On the contrary, the recovery to which it aspires can only be temporary, given that the malignant god, the virus, cannot be annihilated once and for all. It rather mutates constantly, and it always assumes new shapes that are presumably even more hazardous. Again, this is at thelampmagazine.com and is by Giorgio Agamben, described as an Italian philosopher and political theorist. This article is excerpted from his latest book, Where Are We Now? The Epidemic as Politics, published by Rowman and Littlefield. And I'm going to be going back to Joseph Tainter in just a minute. But before I do, let's go back to the chat. Ogan's Iron says, I've been reading that what's happening is an attempt at total global oligarchy. Total. Texas Feral Hog says, being absolutely corrupt and dishonest, the Democrats can't accomplish anything good addressing climate change. Polygon says they want complete control of the biosphere. No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA, says Gnosticism is the theological whack-a-mole that won't stay down. Just to explain briefly to people who don't know, Gnosticism is a heretical religious belief uh, based on light, their gnosis, light, that there is a small elect that has the light, and there is a vast majority, multitude, that does not have the gnosis, does not have the light. And so the people, the elect, they have special privileges. They must be our rulers. This has led to some strange incidents in history, in medieval history, such as the Bulgars. In the Middle Ages, many Gnostics came to the belief, and I can't really explain how, that procreation was evil. And so they took up sodomy instead. Manichaeism is the belief of a dualistic universe, a dualistic God, both good and evil. And Manichaeism is another whack-a-mole that can't be kept down. Polygon says, if you still think you can vote your way out of this or that man-made political saviors coming to save you, are you literally no different than liberal NPC science lovers. This is a spiritual battle, not a political one. Okay. Metal Mike, if a vaccine is imposed on you, KMG, will you submit? No, I won't. I say that now. I mean, I'm not going to travel anywhere because I don't have the money for it. I stopped going to concerts years ago. So long as I, fast food restaurants, I don't need to go to fast food restaurants. So as long as I can go to the grocery store and the liquor store, those are the only places I need to go to. If I am stuck in Victoria, or frankly, if I'm stuck in this hotel room for the rest of my life, it would be superior than submitting to the vaccine. Yes, the Cathar heresy, says Chogokin 666. This was referenced in a Whit Stillman movie, very amusingly. This poor girl found this handsome young man, and he said that that he was a Cathar, right? That he was a Gnostic, and she didn't. Damsels in Distress is the film. She didn't realize until it was too late what that meant sexually. No Sleep Till Breezewood PA says, well, I forgot the light aspect of Gnosticism. It explains a lot about the Zeno series. Shokin 666 says, I have no friends and live in a hole, so I should be okay. Texas Feral Hog says the media had already gone absolutely corrupt before the pandemic. Yes, indeed. Ashley Main Bravo says, I don't understand why the U.S. authorities would deliberately sabotage the plans for the Keystone Pipeline. Is there an underlying agenda behind the mass media push for climate change activism? Well, I suppose the United States has to wean itself off of oil, but they're going to be using oil for quite some time. Now, why they would prefer Saudi oil over Albertan oil is an interesting question. There were all these protesters at the site, and eventually they would have to be pulled away, bulldozed, and their shanties would have to be bulldozed down, and, that would look bad in the news. And the same reason why in Canada, Indians get away with breaking the law. I forget the name of the town of Ontario, where they've been doing this, for over a decade, for 15 years, because the RCMP, or the Ontario Provincial Police, don't want to see on the news pictures of cops dragging away 75-year-old female Indian elders. Nope, we can just have anarchy, because they do not want to look bad on the news. Speaking of collapse, here's Joseph Tainter. This is from his book, The Collapse of Complex Society, which was published by the Cambridge University Press in 1988. What is collapse? Collapse is a broad term that can cover literary traditions, often survive political decentralization. Collapse, as viewed in the present work, is a political process. It may, and often does, have consequences in such areas as economics, art, and literature, but is fundamentally a matter of the socio-political sphere. A society has collapsed when it displays a rapid, significant loss of an established level of socio-political complexity. The term established level is important. To qualify as an instance of collapse, a society must have been at or developing toward a level of complexity for more than one or two generations. The demise of the Carolingian Empire, thus, is not a case of collapse, merely an unsuccessful attempt at empire building. The collapse, in turn, must be rapid, taking no more than a few decades, and must entail a substantial loss of socio-political structure. Losses that are less severe or take longer to occur are to be considered cases of weakness and decline. Collapse is manifest in such things as a lower degree of stratification and social differentiation. Stratification, of course, meaning speciality, more and more and more speciality. And social differentiation, of course, well, a more highly stratified class system. Less economic and occupational specialization of individuals, groups, and territories, less centralized control, that is, less regulation and integration of diverse economic and political groups by elites, less behavioral control and regimentation, less investment in the epiphenomena of complexity, those elements that define the concept of civilization, monumental architecture, artistic and literary achievements, and the like. Low flow of information between individuals, between political and economic groups, and between a center and its periphery. Less sharing, trading, and redistribution of resources. Less overall coordination and organization of individuals and groups. A smaller territory integrated within a single political unit. Well, in terms of collapse, I suppose both the United States and Canada, in terms of the polity, are prime candidates, because both countries, well, especially my own, could be described not as nations, but as multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multilingual empires. And Tainter continues, not all collapsing societies, to be sure, will be equally characterized by each item on this list, and the list is by no means complete. Some societies that come under this definition have not possessed all of these features, and indeed one or two that will be introduced had few of them. This list, however, provides a fairly concise description of what happened in most of the better-known cases of collapse. Collapse is a general process that is not restricted to any type of society or level of complexity. Complexity in human societies, as discussed in greater detail in Chapter 2, is not an all-or-nothing proposition. Societies vary in complexity along a continuous scale, and any society that increases or decreases in complexity does so along the progression of this scale. There is no point on such a scale at which complexity can be said to emerge. Hunting bands and tribal cultivators experience changes in complexity, either increases or decreases, just as surely as do large nations. Collapse, involving as it does a sudden major loss of an established level of complexity, must be considered relative to the size of the society in which it occurs. Simple societies can lose an established level of complexity, just as do great empires. Sedentary horticulturalists may become mobile foragers and lose the socio-political trappings of village life. A region organized under central chiefly administration may lose this hierarchical umbrella and revert to independent feuding villages. A group of foragers may be so distressed by environmental deterioration that sharing and social organization are largely abandoned. There are cases of collapse, no less so than the end of Rome, and no less significant for their respective populations. To the extent, moreover, that the collapses of simpler societies can be understood by general principles, they are no less illuminating than the fall of nations and empires. Any explanation of collapse that purports to have general potential should help us to understand the full spectrum of its manifestations, from the simplest to the most complex. This indeed is one of the central points and goals of the work. These points made, it should be cautioned that in fact defining collapse is no easy matter. The present discussion may serve to introduce the orientation, but the definition will have to be added as the work progresses. In history, the fall of the Roman Empire is in the West the most widely known instance of collapse, the one which comes most readily to popular thought. Yet it is only one case. if a particularly dramatic one, of a fairly common process. Collapse is a recurrent feature of human societies, and indeed, it is this fact that makes it worthwhile to explore a general explanation. The following pages give a brief overview of some cases of collapse. This overview is intended to illustrate common elements to the phenomenon and also to portray the range of societies that are susceptible. In accord with the discussion of the previous section, the reader will find in the following pages a spectrum of societies from simple to powerful and complex. The discussion is arranged by major geographical areas and then chronologically. The picture that emerges is a process recurrent in history and prehistory and global in its distribution. This is by no means a complete list. Further cases were no longer sought when it seemed that redundancy would result. There have been, in addition, no doubt, many hundreds or thousands of collapses among centralized societies that were not organized at a sufficient level of complexity to produce written records. Some of these are known archaeologically, but probably only a small minority. To the extent that collapse is a general process, such cases are fully pertinent to understanding it and should be studied whenever found. The first example that he gives is the Western Chao dynasty, which had succeeded the corrupt Shang in the mastery of China by 1122 BC, and I will discuss that tomorrow. Let's talk about post-America. As we know, because Justin Trudeau said so, Canada is the first post-national nation in the world, or post-national country in the world, more to the point. But America seems to be heading there very quickly indeed. There is a long article in the New Republic, formerly a respectable magazine, by Joe Lowndes, called How the Far Right Weaponized America's Democratic Roots. And you see, these people who support Donald Trump, they think they're patriots, and they think that they are true Americans, but they are not. And why would that be? Well, he explains. Democratic myths of the founding of America have lost currency with the left over the last half century as activists and intellectuals have grappled with U.S. legacies of colonialism and slavery, capitalism and empire. The planted axiom here is that apparently, right from the very foundation of the United States, or even before, apparently Americans were not grappling with colonialism, slavery, capitalism, and empire. But Lowndes continues, meanwhile, their potential value on the right has grown as their partisans have come to imagine themselves as victims of illegitimate state power and as small r Republican patriots whose policy preferences, from healthcare to taxation, from affirmative action to gun rights, can be imagined through a revolutionary frame of disruptive resistance. Yes, Lowndes is arguing here that, well, we won. And you better get on board because you're traitors. You think that you represent America, but that America is gone. It's long gone, and it is not coming back. That you're traitors and terrorists, and all your beliefs are myths or simply false. And, oh, yes, the January 6th insurgency. Oh, it was an insurgency now. A violent anti-democratic juggernaut. And Machiavelli gets dragged in here, whose Republican idea of the necessity of periodic refoundings runs deep in American political culture. You might want to quote what Thomas Jefferson famously had to say about that. But people don't like to talk about what Thomas Jefferson believed, for instance, about violence and about martyrs and the tree of liberty. Once again, the Oklahoma City bomber, Timothy McVeigh, the indictment by the U.S. federal government included in it that at the time of his arrest, he was in the possession of tracts by Thomas Jefferson and Samuel Adams. So is Sam Adams beer, is that going to be canceled now because Sam Adams was a revolutionary hothead? Well, maybe it will. Maybe it will. Okay, this is a bizarre story from Chicago, which in terms of, I don't know, civilizational collapse, it's pretty close to the edge there. This is by Christopher Eberhardt for the Daily Mail. My boys are not monsters. The mother of two brothers who have been charged with shooting a police officer dead has been arrested herself at a hospital after trying to force her way into the room where one of her sons is being treated for a gunshot wound. Evelina Flores, 41, allegedly kicked a hospital security guard in the groin and wrestled with police officers at Advocate Christ Medical Center. Alleged gunman Imonte Morgan, who is charged with first-degree murder over the death of cop Ella French, is being treated there after being shot in the abdomen during the shootout. Flores' attempt to get into his hospital room appears to have been streamed on Facebook Live, posted under the username Marcia out of the box Brady. This is another story about post-America. The woman in the video is presumably Flores, and her outfit and appearance in the video match the mugshots. Police said the videos are of interest to our investigation. Flores can be heard telling nurses, "I want to see my son, Imonte Morgan." She is then seen running by nurses and yelling, "Monty, Monty," and then yells, "Don't touch me," when confronted by police and hospital security in the hallway. Both of her sons, Imonte, 21, and Eric, 22, are charged with crimes connected to the fatal shooting of Chicago cop French, 29, on Saturday. Imonte is the alleged triggerman and is charged with murder of a peace officer, among others, and is currently being treated at Advocate Christ Medical Center in Oak Lawn. Flores said in a 2-minute monologue video from her car that her boy's side of the story isn't being told, but said she couldn't speak too much about it. "My boys are not monsters," she said. "I don't believe a damn thing CPD says, and I can guarantee you this, my boys were afraid. I'm afraid. We fear our police here. We don't trust them." And I'm looking at the mugshots of Imonte and Eric. And, well, Flores, of course, is a Spanish name. Imonte is not, as far as I know. Imonte has a large lion tattoo right all the way around his neck. And he has tattoos, something written under one eye with a bunch of like scars. They're tattoos of scars, red scars. And the other fellow has a spider tattooed on his neck. He has dreads. They look like they belong to a Mexican drug gang, or maybe they have drug gangs in the United States, which are partly black and partly Mexican. The point is, they do look like monsters. But we have more on the murder of a police officer, which a senior official in the city of Chicago referred to Ella Fitzgerald. No, that is not her name. This is from Monica Showalter at American Thinker. Chicago official on bagpipe morning ritual. It seems the Chicago Police Department's officers have more than one reason to turn their backs on Mayor Lori Lightfoot, a.k.a. Mayor Beetlejuice, and the wokester freaks running that crime-plagued city. The Chicago Sun-Times reports, Chicago police officers upset with Mayor Beetlejuice over her reform policies are also directing their anger at the Chicago Police Department's second-in-command. First Deputy Police Superintendent Eric Carter infuriated officers gathered Saturday night at the Cook County Medical Examiner's office to give their slain colleague Ella French a final send-off. Ignoring a sacred ritual, Carter impatiently declared, "We don't have 20 minutes for this shit." He demanded the Chicago Fire Department ambulance bearing French's body be taken directly into the medical examiner's office, skipping the Emerald Society's traditional playing of bagpipes. "We're not waiting on the bagpipes. Go ahead and get the vehicle inside," Carter said. "Take it all the way inside. Do not stop." Showalter comments, "Did I just hear the word shit used in conjunction with honoring a fallen police officer? A very fine fallen police officer, a new mother, an officer who had just saved a baby wounded by gunfire, a 29-year-old woman gunned down in the prime of life, someone who gave her life to the city. Shit. I'm nauseous. This kind of crap would be news even to the most hardened Antifa leftist if uttered it. But to hear it coming from one of the perfumed princes running that wretched city, supposedly in charge of the police and a political appointee, no doubt, is unbelievable. The clown thought those 20 minutes to honor a fallen officer, same as all fallen officers are honored with a sorrowful playing of bagpipes, was time that could be better spent someplace else. And she was just garbage to haul out. My mind boggles. It goes to show what a band of freaks are surrounding Lightfoot, given that this sorry substitute for a man has such a high position of authority in the Chicago Police Department. When police speak of city officials not having their backs, this one went and proved it. I find it a little suspicious that Chicago PD's website has nothing at all on the murder of one of their finest, someone who's a walking ad for police officers being friends of the people, not the Antifa claim that they are enemies. Nothing, zip, nada. Go see for yourself. And, his boss is actually defending him. CPD spokesman Don Terry was asked whether Superintendent David Brown agrees with the way his top deputy handled the situation at the medical examiner's office. Quote, "No comment beyond reminding you what an emotionally difficult and painful night that was and continues to be for everyone involved," Terry wrote in an email to the Sun-Times. And Lightfoot herself, who ought to be axing this ogre for sheer callousness and unfitness of office, the mayor's office declined to comment. When cops say they have a beef with leadership in Chicago, they aren't exaggerating. What's stunning, even to normal people out here, is how deep the rot goes. If this wretch doesn't get thrown out from his sinecure very soon, the cops need to cease protecting him, maybe going on strike, or else make the whole thing an election issue. They're out there and they've got to go. Well, I can explain why this happened. That we see that this is a long-standing tradition in the Chicago police. Playing of bagpipes. You've all seen it on the news. You've all seen it on TV. You've all seen it in movies. And in Chicago, it's the Emerald Society. Emerald referring to the Emerald Isle, that is Ireland. And the reason was, going back to the 19th century, a great many policemen in major American cities were Irish or of Irish descent. You know, the stereotype of the big, burly, beefy, sirloin-faced Irish cop. Well, what this deputy chief is saying is that we don't want to hear about your stupid Irish white customs anymore. This is a black city now. So we're not doing this. That's why it's happened. Again, as I say, post-America. Can't we all get along? No, we can't all get along, because certain people are in charge now, and they have had more than enough from white people. In more post-American news, this is from the Washington Free Beacon. The head of the Minneapolis Democratic Party defended his claim that the burning of a police building during the George Floyd riots last summer was, quote, an act of pure righteousness, unquote. Devin Hogan, chair of the Minneapolis Democratic Farmer Labor Party, ho ho, very satirical, argued in an August column for Southside Pride that the burning of the 3rd Precinct in Minneapolis during the riots last year was justified as, quote, a genuine revolutionary event, unquote. Police fled the building in May 2020 as rioters broke in and set the building on fire. In a statement issued Monday, Hogan defended his comments as accurate and truthful. Quote, fetishizing decorum over substance is a hallmark of, wait for it, white supremacy. If anti-racism offends your sensibilities, then please use this moment to examine the role you play in maintaining and upholding these systems. Which side are you on? That is always a very good question. Which side are you on? And it's a question that we need to ask ourselves. So I took a look at the physiognomy of Devin Hogan, and I leapt to a certain conclusion. So I did some Google searching, and I came upon the website of Stonewall DFL, which is the Alphabet People Caucus of the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And so a little Control F reveals that Devin Hogan is an at-large director of Stonewall DFL. And of course, the gays are a member of the new elect. And they are one of the members of the coalition that has power over the rest of us. Yes, you will bake the cake, bigot. Yes, you will march in the Pride Parade, bigot. Yes, you will approve homosexual propaganda being foisted on 5-year-olds in school. And in Supreme Court news, this is from John Green at American Thinker. In this month's edition of Let's Kill the Constitution, we have the CDC's eviction moratorium as the next demonstration that no one in our government feels compelled to comply with the Constitution anymore. In Alabama Association of Realtors versus Department of Health and Human Services, the Supreme Court upheld the CDC eviction moratorium and did so in a manner that vastly expanded the court's power and authority. The moratorium required that property owners allow others to squat on their property without compensation for over a year. It was clearly a violation of constitutionally protected property rights. It restricted what property owners could and could not do with their property without compensation or due process. The minority, comprising Justices Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Barrett, held that the CDC does not have the authority to impose an eviction moratorium, even during a time of pandemic. Justice Kavanaugh agreed with this minority, but then voted with Justices Roberts, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan to allow the moratorium to stand. Judge Kavanaugh wrote the majority opinion. His rationalization was that the CDC did not have the authority to impose the eviction moratorium, but that the court would allow it to stand, given that it was going to expire in 30 days anyway. He gave the executive branch permission to violate the Constitution for another month. In effect, Justice Kavanaugh issued a waiver to the Constitution. He explicitly stated that the CDC had been violating the law and said it would continue to do so for another month. Who gave the Supreme Court the authority to waive the Constitution or any duly elected laws? There's no such permission in the Constitution. Article 3, which establishes the judicial branch, grants the Supreme Court the authority to interpret laws in the Constitution, not the authority to decide if it's okay to break them. This all raises the question, if it didn't come from Article 3, where did the court get the authority to grant waivers? The justices gave it to themselves. Yes. So what happened with the moratorium? Well, it did expire. And what happened? Joe Biden said it's going ahead anyway. So, the next time these clowns on the left and the never-Trumpers go on about, our sacred Constitution, well, Kavanaugh has just decided we can do whatever the hell we want because we're the Supreme Court and you're not. Just as Justice Roberts found a super secret codicil to the Constitution that gave Congress a taxing power that it didn't know that it had for over 200 years. And yes, post-America. And Joe Biden is a stumbling senile buffoon who leaks snot onto his chin, and then when shown a note saying you have something on your chin, he picks it up and puts it in his mouth, and this is on camera. And for some reason, the media doesn't say, oh my God, we have to get this guy out of office. He does have the nuclear codes, This is from the Mail. President Biden was filmed seemingly ignoring the direction of a Secret Service as a Secret Service agent tried to direct him to a path leading to the White House. In Biden's latest bizarre gaffe, the president was filmed returning to the White House after spending time in Wilmington, Delaware, when the agent points for him to follow the sidewalk path into the White House. Instead, Biden is seen following the agent up the lawn and through the garden into the presidential estate. The video has left shocked critics of the 78-year-old president once again surmising whether Biden is suffering the effects of cognitive decline. Take a look at the video. It's easy enough to find. Not just cognitive decline. I think he would be using a walker if his staff let him get away with it. He is, as they say, shaky on his pins. And, oh, yes, in more post-American news, this is from Peter Belfiore at the Daily Mail. Oregon Governor Kate Brown scraps need for high school students to prove proficiency in math, reading, and writing to get diplomas in bid to bolster minority students who don't test well. So the value of a high school graduation has now been pretty much nullified in the state of Oregon, because the governor does not want to hurt the feelings of minorities. I don't really see how anything less than separation is going to work at this point. If every institution must be destroyed so that minorities may not have hurt feelings, what is the point in keeping things together? I certainly can't see one. Oh, by the way, Kate Brown is America's first bisexual governor. Yay! Yay! Another blow for liberty from the state of Oregon. I mentioned this week, I believe, or certainly like last week, the 1946 Supreme Court decision, Marsh versus Alabama, which held that a company town could not stop a Jehovah's Witness from distributing religious literature on the streets. And the court, what's particularly interesting and I think important about this decision is the Supreme Court held at that time that freedom of speech wasn't merely a procedural matter. That, oh, well, the government can't, crush freedom of speech, but that makes it okay for everyone else to do it. The court pointed out that the more an owner opens up his property to the public in general, the more his rights are circumscribed by the statutory and constitutional rights of those who are invited in. Now, in a later decision, Manhattan Community Access Corp versus Halleck, which was 2019, the court ruled very narrowly, wanting to avoid the consequences with regard to social media of Marsh versus Alabama. Perhaps we will get a court ruling on social media in the light of the established, doctrine in Marsh versus Alabama. But, the court, it was very clear. It was very clear on this question of the importance, the positive good of free speech. And again, I don't know how perhaps, time has passed. The Constitution is a living document. So free speech, First Amendment, times are difficult. There's a lot of hate speech out there. People are scared. People feel that they are being erased, so we can't have free speech anymore. Here's what the majority, I'm going to read from the decision, majority decision. When we balance the constitutional rights of owners of property against those of the people to enjoy freedom of press and religion, as we must here, we remain mindful of the fact that the latter occupy a preferred position. As we have stated before, the right to exercise the liberty safeguarded by the First Amendment, quote, lies at the foundation of free government by free men, and we must in all cases weigh the circumstances and appraise the reasons in support of the regulation of the rights, unquote. In our view, the circumstance of the property rights to the premises where the deprivation of liberty here invoked took place were held by others than the public is not sufficient to justify the state's permitting a corporation to govern a community of citizens so as to restrict their fundamental liberties and the enforcement of such restraint by the application of a state statute. Insofar as the state has attempted to impose criminal punishment on an appellant for undertaking to distribute religious literature in a company town, its action cannot stand. That's pretty straightforward. I have a lot of time for Rand Paul, but he is a libertarian. And I suppose first and foremost, and libertarianism is weaponized autism. This is from Michael Tracy, quoting a story about YouTube suspending Rand Paul because he quoted a study on masks. He quoted the same thing that NPR had quoted, and NPR gets away with it, but Rand Paul doesn't. The senator said in a statement that private companies had the right to bar him, but that YouTube's decision was a continuation of their commitment to act in lockstep with the government. I think this kind of censorship is very dangerous, incredibly anti-free speech, and truly anti-progress of science, which involves skepticism and argumentation to arrive at the truth, he said. Michael Tracy comments, Rand Paul says YouTube has a right to egregiously censor him, even as he accuses YouTube of colluding with the government to impose this censorship. Might be time for a libertarianism rethink. Yes, definitely. I mean, if these people believe in freedom, as they claim, then they will have to come to the realization that private companies are perhaps now even more of a threat to freedom than governments. And let's take a final look at the chat. Ogan's Iron says, James Lindsay said the commie/BLM always refuse respectability politics, but they make sure their enemy's speech and actions are severely subject to respectability. Yeah, that's straight from Saul Alinsky, which is one of the reasons why we have to stop talking about respectability. And that's one of the reasons why the election of Donald Trump was pleasing. You know, on the one hand, I found his vulgarity and his tooting his own horn to be quite distressing. But that's what the times have come to. Okay. What else do we have? Ashimane Bravo. Is the supposed democratic system of politics in America actually much more centralized and authoritarian than regimes like the USSR under Stalin because the people actually believe they can vote? Well, as we know, Stalin he micromanaged everything. There's hardly anything that got done in the Soviet Union without Stalin signing off on it personally after studying the issue. In contrast, the Nazi regime in Germany was exceedingly decentralized. That Nazi leaders acted on the belief that this was what they thought Hitler wanted. And American innovation will be completely gone in a couple of years, says Texas Feral Hog. A few years back, I thought y'all were planning on moving Silicon Valley to Israel. I'm less sure now. Ashimane Bravo again, philosophy PhD David Scribina said that the global push for vaccination and complete global digital passport control is a logical conclusion of technological progression. He's a big Ted Kaczynski fan. Well, I'm not a fan of Ted Kaczynski because, you know, I maintain my controversial and lonely stance against murder. But if you read what Edward Litvak had to say about Kaczynski's manifesto, which you can find in Commentary Magazine, I think it was 1995 or 1996, Litvak, who's a man of the right, admits that Kaczynski absolutely eviscerates conservatism, Inc. That, oh, yes, conservatism is in favor of family and tradition and community, while at the same time saying that choice is the highest virtue. And let's have everyone leave where they live and move somewhere else and then move somewhere else again. that no, it's all completely bogus. Either you believe in rootlessness or you believe in being rooted, and Conservatism Inc. believes in rootlessness. And a rootless population cannot be conservative by definition. I'm always amused when I hear Alberta described as a conservative province. Well, people there are against taxes, and I suppose they want to be left alone, but that is not the same thing as conservatism. The majority of people who live in Alberta were not born in Alberta. They come from somewhere else. And many of them have come to Alberta thinking that the streets were paved with gold, which does not lead to a conservative society. And the Alberta economy is based on oil, which is a boom and bust industry, which again is not conducive to conservatism. And let's see, James Howard Kunstler was just on the Kaiser report. I wonder what he has to say about this whole Biden infrastructure plan and the de facto permanent stimulus money. Well, he's been pretty clear on that. For instance, that we're going to have to redefine what debt means, because apparently it doesn't mean what people used to think that it meant. In the same way, as I always say, that when I hear people carry on about capitalism, well, what kind of capitalism are you talking about? Are you talking about the capitalism that existed before Alan Greenspan rolled out Capitalism 2.0 circa the year 2000? That, oh, we can't have business cycles anymore. We can't have recessions. Oh, and by the way, the rich people, you know, the investment bankers, they do stupid things. They can't be allowed to lose money. They just can't. Also, when they break the law, not just civil law, but criminal law, they can't be criminally punished, because that would, it would kind of mar the reputation and threaten the whole capitalist system. So I think that's it. I think that is it for today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow, of course, at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And it's Theater Thursday. So I am going to be talking about one of my very favorite movies by Michael Powell and Pressburger. It's called The Red Shoes, and it is, of course, based on the Hans Christian Andersen story as expressed in a troupe, a Russian ballet troupe of a Russian exiled impresario played by Anton Walbrook. On the Book Club Friday, I am going to be discussing an excellent book by Laura Dodsworth called A State of Fear. And it is about the decision by our political rulers to aggrandize their power by scaring us to death. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I could honestly really use right now, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. I don't know whether this person is listening, and I don't want to mention that person's name. I'm not going to dox him. But a man has twice attempted to send me money via Interac. And now both times it has failed because Interac uses a skill testing question. And in case anyone decides to send me money via Interac, the skill testing question I would prefer, because it's easy for you to remember, and of course I'm not going to forget the answer, is where do you live, or what city do you live in? Of course the answer is Victoria, right? I don't know what's happened, but I've been given two different skill testing questions, and one of them, which I knew the answer to and which I have used in the past, it didn't work. And then the second one seemed to be an attempt to make it really easy for me, and that didn't work either. So once again, if you're going to use Interac to send money to me, appreciate it in advance. Just ask, question, where do you live? and then everything will be hunky-dory. And I leave you, as always, with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.